Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and today I'm talking with Lucie Fisher, who is a type 1 diabetic and who practices intermittent fasting. Now, I wouldn't have thought that these two go together, because I would have thought that fasting would be dangerous for type 1 diabetics. But I'm happy to report that Lucie put me straight, as well as for other conclusions that I may have jumped to. So we'll get to our chat in just a minute. And this week's episode of the Life After Sugar podcast is brought to you by the After Sugar Club, where you'll get all the resources you need to help you make those small but powerful mindset shifts and get guidance step by step on your personal path to feeling free from sugar so that you can get to a place where you don't even want it, need it, or miss sugar anymore. You'll be part of a friendly, encouraging community of health-conscious people just like you. Most of us are also intermittent fasters, but not all of us. There's a place for everyone. You can sign up at aftersugarclub.com and click on the green button, Join the Club. All right, here's my chat with Lucie Fisher. So I'm talking with Lucie, who is a type 1 diabetic. Nice to see you, Lucie.
Nice to see you too.
Can you tell me a little bit about your story, how you found out that you were type 1 diabetic?
Yeah, sure. So I was diagnosed in 1997. I was 17 years old. It was 24 years ago. I'm 41 years old now. And I was in college. I was in my freshman year of college, and I had all the classic symptoms of type 1 diabetes. I was, peeing a lot, drinking a lot of water, sleeping like 23 hours a day. I essentially stopped going to class, and I was a straight A student. It was just a really tough time. And I went to the health center, and they dismissed me because I ran cross country and track and swimming and rugby. I was playing all kinds of sports, and I was very, very in shape. And they just said, there's nothing wrong with you. You're probably just stressed out because you're away from home, and just kind of manage your stress levels and don't worry about it. So I went back to my dorm, and I was just like, okay, I guess there's nothing wrong with me. And I had a job on campus, and it was at a vending machine company. And the woman there, who was my manager, my boss, she had type 2 diabetes, and she had a blood glucose monitor at work. And she said, can I test your blood sugar? She said, your symptoms sound, she was like, I know what this is. So she tested my blood sugar, and it was like 500 or 600 or something like that. And I had no concept of what that meant. And she just turned like ghost white. And she said, you need to go back to the health center, and you need them to test your blood sugar because, you're sick. You're really sick. And so I went back, and I said, can you guys test my blood sugar? And then they tested it, and then they called me, and they said, you have type 1 diabetes. You need to come to the hospital. We need to get you on insulin. And yeah, it was like a whole whirlwind.
Oh my gosh. And
yeah.
How did they determine that it was type 1 rather than type 2?
So I was 17 when I got it. And at that point, it was really just either you have type 1 or you have type 2. And type 1 means that it's a juvenile disease. So if you were under 18, you definitely had type 1. If you were over 18, they thought you had type 2. Now things have changed where you can get type 1. I have a friend, she's in her 60s, and she got type 1. So it can vary over time, but basically type 1 means that you're insulin dependent, fully insulin dependent. Your beta cells are no longer in your pancreas, are no longer working. If you have type 2, you do have some beta cell functioning. So you may use a drug like metformin or something like that to kind of help your beta cells, produce insulin and, reduce your insulin resistance. So type 2s have some level of pancreatic functioning. Type 1s don't, that's
Right.
it.
Okay. And is it not, I'd read that it was an autoimmune condition, type 1.
It is an auto.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Which means that, are you born with it?
There's different theories about how long, you may have had diabetes in your body. So for me, I still have a working theory that, well, when I was in college, I played rugby and I got really, really sick, like one of the worst flus of my whole life. And I was just dead sick, but I really wanted to play. We were in like a state playoff or something like that. And it was snowing and I was just, I just went out there and I played anyway. And I literally thought I was going to die in the bus ride home. And then not too long after that is when all my symptoms really started kicking up. But a lot of people say, sometimes you just need some sort of major illness to sort of like just be the end to your pancreas. You know what I mean? So it might have been that my pancreas was just sort of functioning on like some lower level, but then once I got sick, it just killed the whole thing off, all the beta cells.
Huh. Yes. Is there type 1 in your family?
No, I'm the lucky one. There's no autoimmune, no type 1, nothing.
Okay. You're the special one.
Yes. Yeah.
So you got this diagnosis, type 1. How did you feel when you got told that?
Well, we had a family friend and they had a daughter and she must have been a toddler when she was diagnosed. And so we were very close with them and I would observe her. And this is in like the 80s and 90s when I was, when I would see her and I saw her giving herself injections and her parents giving her injections. And she was always wincing in pain. And I just thought, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. Like when I got diagnosed, it really felt like it was the end of the world for me. And it was tough. It was really tough. And in the beginning, the technology wasn't good. I wasn't testing my blood sugar very often. The test strips were not as advanced as they are now. And they took a lot of blood. I mean, you really had to just milk your finger to get all the blood out of there and get it onto the strip. And then half the time the strip wouldn't work. And it took a minute to test it. And the strips were expensive. And I was a college kid. And I would probably test myself maybe 4 times a day. And, at any given time in the day, my blood sugar might be 100, but then you check me, then I eat something and then you check me 30 minutes later and I'm up at 350 or 400 and I could stay there for 3 or 4 hours if I don't know. And then, it was just a total crapshoot. So it was a miracle that I, was able to maintain my blood sugars as well as I was, which wasn't great, but it was good enough to get me by.
And so how much support did you get as a type 1 diabetic from your doctors or like the medical establishment?
Yeah, so, I would go to the endocrinologist every single quarter to refill my prescriptions. And, it's very perfunctory, you just go in, they test your hemoglobin A1C. And basically they always told me, try to stay below 7. I think, most people that don't have diabetes are somewhere below 5. So if you can think about 5 to 7, 7 is, I can't remember what 7 correlates to in terms of like an average blood sugar, but it might be like 160 or 180. It's not a good blood sugar. A normal blood sugar is, basically between 80 and 100. 100 is kind of on the high side. So yeah. So they tell you, they take your A1C, they give you your prescriptions. Maybe they talk to you for 5 minutes about, what are you doing health-wise or, diet-wise, exercise, and then that's it. And you're on your way.
Okay. So it was sort of a logical approach to things, mathematical, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a carb ratio, an insulin to carb ratio. You have an insulin sensitivity factor, meaning like if my blood sugar is 200, how much insulin do I take to get it to 100? And, you have certain ratios that you have a basal rate, which is your underlying insulin and your pump. So they would talk about those kind of settings, and that's pretty much it.
And at any time, did anyone ever explain to you what would have either caused type 1, whether it's genetic or any other, or environmental, or even what you could do for your diet in relation to your type 1 diabetes?
No. Nobody really talked to me about diet. Now, what is interesting is when I was diagnosed, my parents took me to a naturopathic doctor when I was 17. And the doctor, so when you get type 1 diabetes, your beta cells are almost dead, but they're not quite. They have like a little bit of fight left in them, and it's called a honeymoon period. So when I got it, we went to the naturopathic doctor immediately, and he said, we can prolong this honeymoon period as long as, a long time, maybe even indefinitely, which I don't know if you can do it indefinitely, but you can definitely prolong it. And he said, but this is the thing, you can't eat carbs. You have to eat, it was basically a keto diet before keto diet was a thing. And he said, you can have a little bit of whole wheat. You can have one whole wheat tortilla a day, and that's your only carb that you can have. And so I did it for a while, but I was kind of miserable. It was a hard diet for a 17-year-old to maintain, but that was the one and only time anybody had talked to me about diet.
And when they were telling you about carbs, did they mean flour, sugar carbs, or did they also include vegetable and fruit carbs?
Yeah, he gave me, the doctor gave me a long list of foods, and he said, this is the glycemic index for every single food item, and you need to stick with the ones that have a low glycemic index so that you don't spike your blood sugar.
So they were working with the glycemic index rather than the glycemic load.
I don't really know the difference, but perhaps.
Yeah, and because what has come up in all my sort of research, and I'm no scientist, but is that there is a difference between the glycemic index, which is, yes, how much a food will spike your blood sugar, compared to pure glucose. That's, I think, their baseline, right? And then glycemic load is a little bit more subtle, to do with the size of the portion of that particular food. So, and other factors that, as far as I understand it, that will affect your blood sugar level in more subtle ways. It's a more subtle approach than just the glycemic index.
Yeah, that makes sense. I should probably look into that a little bit more. Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. So hardly anyone, at least in the sort of regular medical field, talk to you about what you could be eating to at least help you keep your blood sugars as stable as they can be when you're type 1. Is that right?
Yeah, well, actually, I should caveat that. So, it's been popular thinking, and I don't necessarily disagree with this. Look, I want everybody to eat in a way that makes them happy and they feel good. So the general way of thinking with type 1 diabetics, and when you go to the doctor, I think, is you can eat whatever you want, but you need to cover your food with insulin. And I've done it both ways. Obviously, I've done low carb in my life, Atkins, and that's kind of what the naturopathic doctor put me on to today, which we can talk about. But I've eaten every which way in between, including high carb, high sugar, high everything. And yes, you can cover your food with insulin. You can do it, but it's harder. It's much harder. And us diabetics, we call it the roller coaster, the blood sugar roller coaster, highs, lows, highs, lows. And a lot of times, if you eat a meal that's high in carb, even if you're dosing yourself with insulin it's not your own pancreas. So it's hard to get it completely precise. And if you're off even just by a little bit, you can end up with lows and highs, and you can be on that roller coaster. But yes, the general way of thinking in the diabetic community, I think nowadays too, is, eat whatever you want, but just cover yourself with insulin.
And it sounds like a very similar message that is sent to non-diabetics as well, which is basically eat whatever you want and let the insulin take care of it. It's just that you're injecting your insulin, and people like me who are not diabetic are producing it with our pancreas, right?
Right.
So it seems like the message that I understand from it all is, don't change. We've got you covered. Insulin's got you covered.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of it, to be fair to endocrinologists, is people were probably just, I'm sure they would love for people to be on a low carb or low sugar diet, but people are non-compliant. So then they probably have pivoted to say, okay, fine, eat whatever you want, but make sure you give yourself insulin. So I can understand how it's gotten to where it is today, because it's better to at least have somebody taking insulin than just totally going off the rails.
Right. And in my humble opinion, and again, I'm not a diabetic, but in my opinion, part of that problem is our definition of what regular or normal diet is, which is problematic, because it's that sort of normal, in air quotes, that is causing this problem. And then the non-compliance is part of that bigger problem. You see where I'm going with this?
Yes.
So it's like we're blaming the non-compliance on, the fact that people are not going to change their diet. But is it also because what is considered to be a normal diet is kind of not causing diabetes? Because I ate it for ages and I never got diabetes, but it's not helping, let's say it that way.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And, I mean, I see it with, my friends, my family. I mean, it's become very standard, whether you're in America or not. The standard American diet seems to be worldwide now. It's just, that's the way food has progressed over time. It's cheap, it's easy to produce, and that's just where the world is headed. And there's not a lot of education around what people are eating.
Right, right. So no wonder nobody wants to comply. Right. Yeah.
It's harder to comply than not comply,
Right, exactly. So, and when all the cheap, readily available food is the food that will spike your blood sugar, then what else are you going to be eating anyway?
Yeah, I mean, it really takes a concerted effort to be on the lookout for the food that will nourish your body and also not spike your blood sugar. Now, interestingly, with type 1 diabetes, I'm kind of like my own walking science experiment. So, I see people in Facebook groups and like, oh, this thing won't spike your blood sugar. It'll be like some keto pasta or something like that. I'll be like, oh yeah, let me try that. And I'm like, nope, same as regular pasta. That still spikes your blood sugar, So it's a lot of the food choices we make are based on marketing, but I can tell you, flour, sugar, all these things will definitely, without a doubt, spike your blood sugar.
Yeah, and I'd say whether you're diabetic or not.
Right. Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, your blood sugar when you eat those things might spike up to 160 and then come right back down to 80. But mine, if I let it go without it, giving myself insulin, I'll be at 300 or 400.
Right. So we both have a spike in our blood sugar. It's just that my pancreas will bring it down with insulin and yours won't. So you have to inject the insulin.
Right. But even if as a non-diabetic, you're subject to the roller coaster, because even if you're only going up from 100 to 160 and then back down again, that's still a 60-point rise. It'll make you a little tired. It may trigger other hunger later after you, because the thing with the roller coaster is a lot of times when you go low, high, and then you drop down low very fast, and you're in that low range, your body forces you to eat something because your blood sugar is low. So the same thing can happen to you where, 100, 160, 100, you're going to start to feel hungry just because that change is so dramatic, even for you, it's going to trigger your hunger as well. So it's the best thing you can do is to try to keep your insulin levels steady and try to make food choices that are not going to be putting you on the roller coaster.
Right, right. And again, whether you're diabetic or not, that's good advice for everybody. Right. And with what's the so-called low carb way of eating, which I also take issue with as not as a concept, but as the name for it, because I don't consider it is low carb. It's only low compared to the extremely high carb way of eating. But be that as it may, along with that, you also found intermittent fasting and started that, right? I just want to take a quick break to introduce you to my partner for this podcast, Medicine with Heart, which is an international functional medicine clinic specializing in difficult chronic cases of hormone imbalance, Lyme disease, mold illness, and digestive dysfunction. You can sign up for a consultation with their team to see if they can help reverse your disease. Find out more about them at medicinewithheart.com.
Yeah, so I can give you a little backstory on the intermittent fasting. So my entire adult life, I'm 4'11", so I get up to 123 pounds, which is always sort of my high water mark. And I know it's not a lot of weight for a lot of other people, but for me, if you go on the BMI chart, which I know a lot of people disagree with, if you go on the BMI chart, after 123, above that is considered overweight for my height. So I always have been like, I gotta stay under 123 my whole adult life. So I get up to 123 and then I go down. My goal weight is always 113 pounds. But anyway, had gotten up to 123 pounds. This was in May 2021. Again, I've been on this cycle for years now. And I listened to a podcast for type 1 diabetics, and Jen Stevens was on it. It's called the Juice Box Podcast. And she was talking about intermittent fasting. And at the time, the host, he said, I don't really know anybody with type 1 that does intermittent fasting. And Jen said, I don't know either, but it probably would be helpful. And so I thought, you know what, let me try this. I had tried intermittent fasting a couple of years prior, but I was doing dirty fasting and it just didn't work for me. And so this time I did the clean fasting. And when I started intermittent fasting a couple months in, now I do 1 meal a day with intermittent fasting, but I noticed my taste started changing. And at the time in May 2021, I was eating all the things. And to be clear, my diet isn't totally perfect now. Like and I'm not a no carb person. I'll have a small amount of rice or maybe a half a piece of bread with what I eat, because I feel good having some amount of carb in my system, but it's dramatically reduced from where it was prior. But so I started, I heard that podcast in late July, early August 2021, started that, moved into OMAD, and probably a couple months into my intermittent fasting journey, I noticed my taste started changing. And I'm a person that has eaten dessert with every single meal of my whole life, pretty much. When I was a kid, my parents deprived me of desserts, and so I just went nuts when I became an adult. And I would eat dessert after every single meal, whether it was a piece of chocolate or something or a piece of cake. I always had to have something sweet after every single meal. And so anyway, I started with intermittent fasting. I still had my dessert because I was OMAD and I was doing the dessert. But then I noticed when I had it at the end of my eating window, my blood sugars would be really wild after my meal finished. So I thought, okay, why don't I move my dessert to the beginning of my eating window, and then I can deal with any fallout that happens during my eating window so that I don't have to break my fast for a low blood sugar that may happen later. So then I started doing that. And then I started getting full much faster. And then I started thinking to myself, I don't want to eat this dessert. I'm just eating it out of habit. But it's like wasting calories that could be used for more nutritious food because I'm getting full so much faster, and I'm just blowing it on this stupid dessert that I don't even want anymore. And so then I just said, you know what? I'm going to experiment. And it was right around this time that I heard you on Graham Curry's fast.
Graham Curry's The Fasting Highway. Yeah.
The Fasting Highway. Yeah, you were on there and you were talking about your experiences, and I thought, hey, she totally cut out sugar. That wasn't even like a thought in my head. And so I listened to that, and then I thought, all right, let me try that. And so I did it. And so now I've essentially cut out sugar. Now I'm not going to say that every once in a while I might not, if it's a special occasion or something, might have like a half or a quarter piece of cake or something like that. But for the most part, I do not eat dessert or anything sweet in my eating window. And I've noticed a dramatic improvement in my blood sugars, because sugar is very difficult, I have found personally. Maybe other type 1s have a different experience, for me to dose insulin for.
Yeah, it would be. Yes, I'm sure it would be. And do you feel that you're missing out, you're depriving yourself now that you don't eat dessert anymore?
No, actually, I don't. And it's funny because I actually kind of get stressed out when I know dessert's going to be involved. Like when I went to Thanksgiving, I had quit sugar. This was like 2 weeks in. And I knew there was going to be dessert there. I knew my best friend's mom had made a beautiful dessert. And then I was just thinking to myself, I really don't want to eat this dessert, but it's rude not to. So I had some, but the whole time I was like, now I've got to deal with the blood sugar issue again. And I was really stressed out about it. I actually feel more calm and relaxed not eating dessert. I feel happier this way.
Yeah, totally. And would you have ever imagined yourself saying that if I'd have asked you before you cut sugar?
No, in fact, I listened to an earlier one of your podcasts, and you were saying that you were the type of person people would be like, oh, Netta's coming over, we're going to bake some cakes. That was me, Lucie. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine? I'm the type 1 diabetic and everybody's like, bake some cakes, Lucie's coming over. But that's how it was. Yeah. Because I loved eating it.
Right, exactly. And, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no value judgment or anything going on. I'm just amazed for myself and for you, how that kind of, again, I'm talking about the way we see things as being normal, that kind of normal way of seeing things, I'm the dessert queen. You've got to have a dessert at the end of every meal. How that has completely changed, and yet you're not suffering.
No. And, I'm at a point now, because I've had diabetes for 24 years now, and I have had complications with my diabetes. And I think a lot of people that are well into having diabetes have experienced this as well. And I just feel like this is a time where I have to take care of my body, and the desserts are not helping. So I kind of wish I had figured this out earlier, but I guess better late than never.
Oh yeah, better late than never. And you're certainly earlier than I ever was. And exactly. And, if you're happy with how you're eating and how you're not eating, how you're fasting, I don't see where the problem is.
Yeah. It's a total shift in mindset, but it's one, I mean, I talk to my partner about this a lot, because when I started intermittent fasting, he's like, you're not going to be able to keep this going. This is a fad diet. This is just not going to last. But now, that I've been into it for, 6-7 months, whatever it is, fully into it, I just can't imagine going back. I don't want to eat that much food anymore. I don't want to eat 3 meals a day. Like, the thought of that just makes my stomach hurt, to think that I would actually eat that much food. And the thought of being forced to eat sugar every day again and messing up my blood sugars, I don't want to do that again. I felt so terrible with bad blood sugars.
Yeah, totally. You don't want to go back to something that made you feel awful. Why would you?
Right.
Yeah. And you're not doing this for your weight, because, okay, you said you're 4'11", 123 pounds at your highest.
Right.
Like me, I'm 5'2". At my highest, I was 130 pounds. It's, if you compare with the average, it's still small, right? So objectively speaking, you didn't need to lose a lot of weight, but did it stabilize your weight at a good level for you?
Yeah, actually, I have a really funny story related to that. So I started at 123 pounds, and I started out like a 16-8, and then for my intermittent fasting protocol. So I did 16-8, and then I quickly moved to 17-7, and then I did 19-5, and I was thinking, how am I going to eat 2 meals a day in 5 hours? Like, that doesn't work. And so then I moved to OMAD.
Which
so
is
the weight
1
was
meal a day, just for those who don't know.
Yeah, sorry, not everybody's an intermittent faster, right, on your podcast. So I moved to 1 meal a day, and the weight was really just falling off very fast. And it's interesting, my insulin needs, we can talk about this a little bit later, but my insulin needs just went way, 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 way down as I was doing this, which is another huge benefit. But so, the weight just fell off. And then, so I hit 100 pounds. First of all, I told you my goal weight always was 113 pounds. Any diet I ever tried, I always tried to get to 113 pounds. And I'd be like, I did it, I'm done, see you later, and then I go back up to 123, and we'll do this whole thing over and over and over again. So anyway, I got to 100 pounds, which was just like, no way. This is like, incredible, like just totally incredulous that this had happened. So then I got to 100 pounds, and then I was like, you know what? This is around the time that I had this epiphany that I didn't want to eat sugar anymore. And so I cut the sugar out, and 7 pounds just fell off without me trying. I wasn't eating any less food, nothing. It was just that I cut the sugar.
So were you down to 93 pounds, or were you already at 107 and went down?
I was at 100 when I was still eating everything, my regular diet, just doing intermittent fasting. And then, once I cut the sugar, when I was at 100 pounds, once I cut the sugar, I just fell to 93 with literally no other changes.
And is that a healthy weight for you?
Yeah. That's definitely so I went from the high end of the normal range on the BMI to like the low end of the normal range. But I feel very healthy at 93 pounds. I feel like this is the correct weight. My insulin needs are way down. My blood sugar is much easier for me to manage. I feel like this is the correct weight, and I've been able to maintain it for like the last two months or so. Great. Without any issues.
Yeah. And obviously, if you're a type 1 diabetic or type 2 or not a diabetic at all, you need to be able to have insulin doing its job in your body. But I think what people don't tell us, or not enough at least, is that you don't actually need that much insulin. And as a type 1 diabetic, you don't need more insulin than a non-diabetic, or do you?
I don't know exactly how the translation works, but all type 1 diabetics need what's called a basal insulin, which is your baseline insulin. That's if you're not eating, you're just alive. You need a basal insulin, and then you need a bolus insulin for every time you eat. So both my basal insulin and my bolus insulin went down when I started intermittent fasting. And then when I cut sugar, it went down even further. So the beauty of fasting is all you have is your basal insulin in the background, your background insulin. So that's much easier to deal with. Bolus insulins are larger amounts of insulin. And so at that point, that could cause your blood sugar to go low. So you're trying to keep your boluses as small as possible so that you can, keep yourself off the roller coaster. So the combination between the intermittent fasting and cutting out sugar just has greatly reduced the insulin that I have going in my body at all times. And it keeps you very stable that way.
Yeah. So it keeps your blood sugar stable, which in turn keeps your insulin stable and lower. And really, that's what you're looking for. Whereas, as far as I can tell, the sort of common advice for diabetics is, as we were saying before, eat all the things, carry on, and just give yourself the insulin that will bring your sugar levels down. But I mean, that means that you're actually stimulating insulin, whether it's from your pancreas or from an injection, more often than it needs to be stimulated. How come they give you that type of advice? Where does that advice come from?
I mean, I think it goes back to the issue of just non-compliance and the idea that if you throw a pill at something or you throw an injection at something, then that's secure because people don't want to actually do the work. I mean, I say the work, but it's honestly once you get past your mental barriers and you go through maybe a week of adjustment or maybe not even a week, you know, you really it's really not that hard to do. It's just you got to want to do it and you got to want to feel better and you got to understand that feeling better is a possibility for you.
Yeah, and the other things than medication or injections are also a possibility for you, because that's my point. I mean, what you were telling me is that nobody really mentioned sort of dealing with your type 1 diabetes through diet, or at least partly through diet. So how can we give the advice of taking medications and then say, yes, but if they don't, people aren't compliant? Yes, but you haven't given them a choice.
Yeah, and in fact, I haven't been to when I first got diagnosed with diabetes, I had one session with a nutritionist, and the advice. Now remember, this is 1997. Things probably have changed. I haven't had another session with one because I found that one to be completely useless. But it was just like, you know, eat a lot of carbs. You know, just take your insulin. You're going to take X number of units. Eat this many carbs with your meal, and it was a lot. And yes, you can still eat your dessert. Just make sure you give this amount of insulin. And it wasn't really helpful, but I think you're right. If there was more messaging around, hey, look, and just to get people to understand, I think part of the problem is you just assume everybody's stupid and they don't understand. If you tell people and they get it, then they're more likely to make the changes. But if you never tell them, then they have no chance of getting it.
Yeah, it's not that we're stupid. It's just that the information is not being given. How can you, and I say this as a teacher, you know, how can you expect people to know stuff if you don't teach them stuff?
Well, and I don't know how the health system is in Canada, but in the United States, I mean, unfortunately, the doctors are so jammed. They have so many patients. I see my doctor once a quarter, and my doctor that I have now is the best endocrinologist I've ever had throughout the course of having diabetes. And so I see her once a quarter, maybe once every 6 months. Sometimes I see the nurse practitioner that she works with. And, you know, we talk for 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe, you know, so there's not enough time. I think it's a general failing of the health system in general, you know, more than, you know, individual doctors or them not getting the information across. They simply don't have the time. And the problem is so large with so many people with type 2 and so many people with type 1, they can't handle the load.
Yes. And in one of my podcast episodes, I was talking with Michelle Hearn, who's the author of The Dietitian's Dilemma. And she was saying, you know, similar things, like she quit her job as a dietitian because she was kind of forced, you know, to give this type of advice that she didn't even agree with. And I would argue that it probably takes as much time, if not less time, for a health professional to give one type of advice, in other words, eat this and not that, than it does to say, you know, take this pill or this medication and not that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and as long as we as a society consider that the standard American diet, that's a high carb diet, is the norm, you know, and then blame us as citizens or consumers or patients for not being compliant, it will make no sense. It will just continue to be a medication-based approach.
Yeah, and I find that, you know, the more people I speak to that have type 1 or type 2, when they actually make a lifestyle change, it's, you know, it's just like anything else. You hit rock bottom. You know, I've had a lot of complications over my life. A lot of other people that I've talked to that have type 2, their weight was at an incredibly high level. Their blood sugars were also really high and they just felt terrible. And then they figured it out. They bought, you know, Dr. Jason Fung's books or whatever the case may be, and then they educated themselves. But you know, it would be better if our society as a whole was more preventative in its thinking than, you know, reactive to something that's, you're too far gone already,
Right, right. And, I guess it's up to us to, as patients or, as consumers, to educate ourselves, because from what I can tell, we're not being educated by anyone else.
Yeah, and that's why I think, platforms like your podcast are really helpful, because it's good to hear stories of people that have been able to do this. And you just need that support. You need that like kind of kick to get yourself going in the right direction. And you need to hear more and more of that messaging, which has been, very silent over, at least for most of the time that I've had type 1 diabetes. I haven't really heard much about it. And I feel like it's now becoming more mainstream, which is great.
Yeah, yeah. And just to finish off, I'm curious to know if you've had pushback either from the medical community or from friends and family about you fasting as a type 1 diabetic.
Yes, I definitely have gotten some comments like, well, how are you going to do this if you get a low blood sugar? And in fact, I'm a member of a couple of different Facebook groups, and I would ask questions in the group like, hey, this is when I first started. Hey, how do you guys manage your insulin when you're fasting? What happens if you get a low blood sugar? Do you just count that fast as like just start over the next day? Like, how do you think about it? And the admins would remove it and say, you're asking for medical advice. You can't do that. Type 1s shouldn't be fasting. And so I felt like very alone. And I heard it from friends and family, like, what happens if you get a low blood sugar? Are you going to die? You're fasting. I'm like, yes, I'm fasting, but it doesn't mean that if I get a low blood sugar, I'm not going to treat it. I'm always going to treat a low blood sugar if I need to, same way that I always have. And I treat it, and then I pretend like it never happened. And, I continue on with my fast. If I stopped my fast every time I treated a low blood sugar, then I would never make it through a single fast, probably. I mean, I probably, I fast every single day, and, out of a week, I probably make it 3 or 4 days with a full fast without getting a low blood sugar. Those other days I get a low blood sugar, and you know what? I treat it,
And did you used to get low blood sugar when you weren't fasting?
I got low blood sugars when I wasn't fasting. Nothing's changed. I treat it exactly the same way. So that's the funny thing, is it's the same.
Yeah, nothing's changed except that you feel better.
Yes. Yeah. So I definitely, I think a lot of doctors either don't understand what intermittent fasting is. So I haven't heard about it from any of my doctors. My doctor now, who's great, she says, I don't really know much about intermittent fasting, but it seems to be working for you. So keep doing what you're doing, like carry on.
Yeah. Great. What more can you hope for? And same thing with not eating sugar. Have you come across people that are shocked and horrified?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not really socially acceptable to not eat sugar.
Yep. Yeah, you're telling me.
I know. Yeah. And so if you're like, nah, I don't want that dessert, like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you eating that dessert? And sometimes I tell people like, hey, I'm just easing off the sugar. And sometimes I play the diabetes card, which it doesn't come in handy that often, but I'm like, hey, I'm a type 1 diabetic. I really got to clean up my diet. And they're like, oh, sorry, I didn't said anything. So sometimes I play that card to just, and then it doesn't come up again. You don't have that benefit, but
no, I don't. I just say, oh, because it's my podcast, or no. I know I don't play any card. I just say no thanks.
Yeah. And that's a perfect response too. But I find that like if people keep pressing me, especially since they knew me as somebody that loved sugar so much, it was such a big change.
It's understandable that, you yourself are going through changes that not everyone is aware of, obviously. Although I myself was quite public about it as I was going through the process at the beginning, and I'll publish it in a book one day, one day soon. But, it's normal that other people are not where you are. They're not on the path with you. So if you go from dessert loving, Lucie, to no thanks, no desserts from me, it's normal that people will be shocked.
Right. Yeah. But I also am getting positive feedback too. I've lost a lot of weight. I think I look really toned now, despite not really exercising that much. And people are like, what are you doing? And then so sometimes that sparks positive conversation. It's not all negative. But it's been an experience.
It's been an experience. I'm sure it has. Yes. And, when people ask me, how do you do that? How do you get all this energy? How do you look, so slim, and then you're in your 50s, it doesn't show. And when I tell them how I do it, they're like, oh no, it's okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a hard change. It's hard in concept, the change, but once you put it into practice, and I do think for me, especially, I don't think if I hadn't done intermittent fasting, I don't know that I would have been able to quit sugar, because it really just changed my entire mindset. It gave me a sense of control that I never had before. And I don't think that if I hadn't done intermittent fasting, I'm pretty sure I would still be on sugar. But the two don't have to go hand in hand.
No, absolutely. Yes. I mean, they often end up going hand in hand, but they don't have to. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think this is very inspiring for people who have diabetes type 1 or type 2 or none at all, for everybody to see that, first of all, you've taken your health into your own hands with, of course, medical supervision. But you've also educated yourself and empowered yourself. And that in itself is something that, that doesn't cost anything. It just requires some open-mindedness on your part, I think.
Right. Yes, I agree. And I would love to, I'm really trying hard to get the message out further, because I think it's a really powerful tool for everybody, especially people with diabetes.
Totally. And you have a podcast, don't you?
Yes, I do. It's called The Fast Life with Diabetes. And it's type 1 and type 2 diabetics talking about their experiences with intermittent fasting. And like me, most people have made changes to their diet over time. So it's just real world examples of people. The type 2 people that I've had on the podcast thus far have all been able to reverse their type 2 diabetes through intermittent fasting and diet. And the type 1, same as me, huge insulin reductions over time, much steadier blood sugars. I mean, it's incredible. But just making very simple changes to your lifestyle can really make a huge difference.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. I'll put the link to your podcast with the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for talking to me. Amazing.
Thank you, Netta. I appreciate it.
Well, there you go. Another myth busted by Lucie, who found that intermittent fasting wasn't dangerous for her type 1 diabetes. It was actually helpful. Who'd have guessed? And when she changed her diet, she also found that her insulin response was much more stable, and this helped dose her insulin needs. And therefore, it was way easier for her to be compliant because she could see the benefits of changing her diet and, by association, her lifestyle, which includes intermittent fasting. And if you're looking for more information about the link between sugar and intermittent fasting, then go to aftersugarclub.com and click on the Learn More button to go to my FAQ section, where I explain, like only a teacher can, about sugar, hunger, intermittent fasting, and also gut health and fermented foods. Head on over to aftersugarclub.com. You can also grab my list of top 10 books about sugar, intermittent fasting, and gut health, because, knowledge is power, and I don't want you to spend the hundreds of hours that I spent reading through dozens of books. So that's why I want to give you my list of top 10 books, and even if you only read 1 or 2 of them, it'll make a huge difference in how you see sugar, intermittent fasting, and gut health. And you can download that list at aftersugarclub.com and click on the orange Learn More button. And if you're an intermittent faster, then I have 5 tips for you to help get rid of cravings that may be getting in the way of the easy and natural intermittent fasting lifestyle that you're looking for. You'll find those at aftersugarclub.com. You can also find lots of free resources on the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, on the Life After Sugar Facebook page, and come and subscribe to my Instagram, which is at My Life After Sugar, where I post pictures of what I eat, what I do, and sometimes pictures of our cat, so that you can see that it is totally possible to live an active, happy, and fun life, even if you don't eat sugar. And for a deeper dive into your relationship with sugar and how you can work towards freeing yourself from the hold that sugar has on you, so that you can get to that place of joyful freedom from sugar that I've been living for almost 7 years, and experience what it feels like not to want, need, or even miss sugar anymore, then the After Sugar Club is for you. Check it out at aftersugarclub.com. And if this podcast is inspiring you to take one more step towards your life after sugar, then could I ask you to please scroll down and leave the podcast a lovely 5-star rating and leave a short review to let me know how this podcast is inspiring you to break free from sugar your way and find the real sweetness in life. And if this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe to the Life After Sugar podcast so that it appears magically in your podcast player every Sunday. Thank you for listening. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.